All right, so you're looking into Ukraine, huh? Specifically, all this talk about potential peace negotiations. Well, we've got some really interesting stuff to unpack here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, from Zelenskyy himself, no less.
Wow.
And some pretty lively discussions happening online, too.
Makes sense. Lots to talk about.
Oh, absolutely. But the thing that's really caught my attention is Zelensky's stance on who gets to call the shots on Ukraine's future. It's not who you'd think.
It's pretty fascinating, yeah. He's drawing a hard line. No other world leader, no matter how powerful, no matter how well-intentioned, can negotiate peace for Ukraine.
Exactly.
Only Ukraine itself.
Yeah. And he doesn't mince words about it either. One article quoted him saying, we are the victims. It would be unfair if everyone started saying how the country should live.
Right. Such a powerful statement because, this idea of self-determination, it resonates with all of us on a personal level, right? We all want to make our own choices about how we live our lives.
Yeah, totally.
And Zelensky's making that same argument for Ukraine.
It's a really interesting point, especially, given all that's going on right now. I mean, the U.S. election just happened. Trump's back in the White House.
Right. Given his history with foreign policy, particularly when it comes to Russia.
Oh, yeah.
That adds a whole other layer to this, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There are a lot of folks online who are, a little nervous about what Trump might do. Some even bringing up past events as reasons to worry that maybe Trump will go for a quick win over what's best for Ukraine in the long run.
Yeah, I've seen those comments too. And his past actions, like the withdrawal from Afghanistan, haven't exactly helped that perception either.
Right. But there's this other side of the conversation online, too, wondering if, Ukraine taking billions in aid, does that give other countries, well, a bit of leverage in these negotiations? I saw one person online put it like, just because you help your neighbor out with some sugar doesn't mean you get to tell them what to bake with it.
Yeah, I like that.
Right. It's a good analogy. It really makes you think. Where's the line between supporting a nation in need and, well, trying to influence the choices they make? What do you think about that?
It's complicated, right? I mean, on one hand, giving aid should be about just that.
Yeah.
Helping. It's not about, holding it over their heads,
All right.
But on the other hand, the countries offering that aid, especially when it's substantial, they might feel some responsibility to ensure it's being used wisely, in a way that doesn't conflict with their own interests. It's tricky.
It is. So let's say Ukraine does decide to come to the table, to negotiate, I mean. What does Zelenskyy want to see happen first, before he even sits down with Putin?
He's been pretty clear about a couple of things. First, he wants a concrete peace plan.
Before anything even starts.
Before they even start talking. To make sure those talks happen from a position of strength, not out of desperation.
Okay, so it's about setting the stage for a real dialogue, not just, scrambling for any deal to stop the fighting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the second thing, security guarantees. He's adamant about that. Whatever agreement they reach, it has to include strong measures to prevent Russia from just, regrouping and launching another invasion down the line.
That's a good point. And speaking of guarantees, this whole debate about the Budapest Memorandum is really heating up online. A lot of people arguing that, hey, the U.S. is obligated to provide military support because of that agreement.
It's interesting, right? Because that agreement where Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for security,
Right.
It's at the heart of this debate.
Yeah, and it gets even more complicated because, well, some people online have pointed out, and I hadn't even thought of this before, but that document uses the word assurances.
Oh, interesting.
Not guarantees. And those two words, legally speaking, well, they mean very different things. Sounds like there's a lot of nuance there to dig into. Definitely something to keep in mind as we follow this story.
It really does tie into Zelensky's demands now for more concrete guarantees,
Oh, absolutely. He's learned from what happened. He's not settling for vague promises this time around.
Definitely not.
It's like he's drawing a line in the sand. You can support us, that's great, but you don't get to make these life or death decisions for us.
Exactly.
And, he doesn't shy away from how serious this all is. In one of the articles, he asks, but if Putin comes back with his millions of people, will we be defending ourselves again, or will we watch our women and children die?
Powerful words. You can really feel the anxiety, the worry that a lot of Ukrainians are carrying right now.
No kidding.
They've seen the worst of this war, firsthand. And it makes sense they'd be cautious about any agreement that doesn't address the possibility of it all happening again. It brings up another point that a lot of people are talking about online. Even if other countries don't have the quote-unquote right to negotiate for Ukraine,
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Do they still have the power to influence what happens?
That's the real question, isn't it? It's like those ideals of fairness and self-determination, they kind of bump up against the reality of how international relations actually work.
Exactly. And there's been a lot of talk online about Trump's potential influence, given his, let's say, unconventional deal-making style.
Yeah.
And, well, he's made some pretty admiring comments about Putin in the past.
Right, and some people are worried that he might pressure Ukraine,
Into a deal that benefits him or Russia.
Right, even if it's not really in Ukraine's best interest, especially because some see a pattern with Trump, with how he handled the withdrawal from Afghanistan, where some argue at least that he prioritized a quick resolution over, well, long-term stability and what the people there actually needed. Do you see any parallels there?
It's definitely a concern that's out there. But, it's important to remember that every situation is different, has its own complexity.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But what we can say is Zelenskyy is making a strategic move here, emphasizing Ukraine's right to decide its own fate. It's like he's preempting any attempts to force them into a deal that ignores their core concerns.
It's almost like he's setting the narrative before negotiations even begin, appealing to international support and highlighting the injustice of basically imposing a solution on the victim here. But can Ukraine really stand up to that pressure from Russia, maybe even a less supportive U.S. administration?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, Ukraine has shown incredible resilience throughout this whole thing, both militarily and in how they've rallied international support.
Yeah.
But they are facing a very powerful opponent in Russia. And the uncertainty around Trump's position adds another layer of complexity to all of this. It makes it difficult for Zelenskyy to plan.
It's like he's trying to navigate a maze in the dark. But even with all that uncertainty, Zelensky's laid out what he wants to see in a peace plan. What are the key elements? What does he envision as a successful outcome here?
Well, he's not talking about just a ceasefire on the surface.
All right.
He wants to address what actually caused this conflict in the first place.
Right.
He's talking about clearly defined boundaries that Russia can't cross, mechanisms to prevent this kind of aggression from happening again.
So it's not just about stopping the fighting now, it's about creating the conditions for real peace and security down the road.
Exactly. And that's where his insistence on these strong security guarantees comes in. Zelensky's looking for concrete actions from the international community, not just vague promises, things like military support, clear consequences if the peace agreement is violated.
And that brings us right back to that Budapest memorandum, doesn't it?
It does. Seems like Zelenskyy learned a tough lesson there. And this time around, he wants commitments that are very clear, no room for misinterpretation.
Right. Unambiguous.
Exactly. He wants guarantees that are enforceable that people can actually act on, not just, symbolic gestures.
But what could those guarantees actually look like? In practice, I mean. What could actually provide the level of security that Zelenskyy is demanding?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
That'll be the subject of some intense negotiations if and when these peace talks actually happen. There are some possibilities out there, each with their own challenges and implications. One that I've seen a lot of people talking about online is NATO membership for Ukraine.
Yeah, I've seen that too. Seems like a difficult path, though, given how things are right now. Wouldn't that be seen as a major provocation to Russia?
Yeah, it's a really sensitive issue. But Zelenskyy is making the argument that NATO membership is the most effective way to truly guarantee Ukraine's security in the long run.
Because a NATO attack on one member is an attack on all.
Right. It's a powerful deterrent.
I get that. But can you really see NATO making that commitment right now? I mean,
it's hard to say.
Are there any other options on the table that might be more realistic? So full NATO membership might not be in the cards right now. What else is out there? What other options could actually give Ukraine the security guarantees it needs?
Well, there are a few possibilities that I've seen people talking about, that might offer some protection without, setting off Russia the way full NATO membership would.
Okay.
One idea is a bilateral security agreement between Ukraine and, a group of Western powers. Maybe the U.S. would be involved.
So instead of the whole NATO alliance, it'd be more targeted.
Right. Tailored specifically to Ukraine's situation, their needs, their security concerns.
I see.
It could involve things like increased military aid, maybe even joint training exercises, maybe even pre-positioning military equipment right there in Ukraine. Now, it wouldn't be as powerful as, Article 5 of the NATO treaty.
Right, where an attack on one is an attack on all.
Exactly. But it would still send a pretty strong message to Russia. Mess with Ukraine, and there will be consequences.
That's interesting. It's like a middle ground between full NATO membership and those, well, more vague assurances of the Budapest Memorandum.
Yeah, kind of.
But even with those kinds of guarantees, wouldn't there still be a risk? I mean, couldn't Russia find ways to, get around the agreement or undermine it somehow?
Oh, of course. I mean, no agreement is perfect,
Yeah.
but that's why it would have to include really robust ways to verify what's happening,
Okay.
ways to enforce it, maybe international monitors stationed along the border.
Like UN peacekeepers?
Yeah, potentially, to observe and report on any violations.
Got it.
There's also been talk about setting up a demilitarized zone along the border, kind of a buffer zone.
To try to prevent accidental clashes.
Yeah, or any kind of provocation.
But wouldn't a DMZ depend on Russia actually cooperating?
True. And, well, their track record there isn't great.
Yeah.
That's why it would all come down to how strong those monitoring and enforcement mechanisms really are and how willing the international community is to, actually do something if there are violations.
Yeah. Take action.
Right. At the end of the day, deterring future aggression is going to take a lot of different things. Diplomacy, economic pressure, a real military deterrent.
It seems like Zelensky's got a tough job here, standing firm on Ukraine's right to choose its own path, but also recognizing that they need help, that the reality of global power dynamics matters.
He does. And it's a high-stakes balancing act, that's for sure. The decisions he makes in the next few weeks, months, they could have a huge impact, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole world.
It's been a fascinating deep dive. Really highlights just how complex this whole situation in Ukraine really is. Zelensky's demands, the potential problems with international agreements. A lot to think about.
Definitely.
What are some of the key takeaways here? What should our listener keep in mind as they follow this story?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that things are changing all the time. There's so many factors at play. Ukraine's own internal politics, how the world reacts to what Russia's doing. And of course, well, you never really know what a Trump administration is going to do next in terms of foreign policy.
It's true. It's a good reminder that we all need to stay informed, stay engaged, and really think critically about the information that's out there. What do you think is the most crucial thing for our listener to really consider as they dig deeper into this issue?
I'd say think about the long-term effects of these different peace proposals, security arrangements that people are talking about.
Right.
What are the pluses and minuses of each one? What kind of compromises might Ukraine have to make, and at what cost? These are big, tough questions. There aren't any easy answers, but they're important questions to consider.
Well said. I think our listener is going to come away from this deep dive with a much better understanding of the challenges that Ukraine's up against in their search for peace and security.
It is a complex situation, constantly evolving. But if we stay curious, informed, engaged, well, we can all do our part to make the world a little more peaceful, a little more just.
I like that. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep exploring these issues, keep seeking out different perspectives, and, well, come to your own conclusions.